Welcome to the Hennepin First Roadway Improvements listening session number 3. This is the end of an engagement process that started to set a vision for this corridor, and we're now in the middle of the third round of this engagement. So I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We intend to do a presentation here that I'll talk about in just a second, but recognize that we do have a website up, and we'll show you that in a little bit with a lot more information on it as well. So there are a lot of resources out there to learn about this project. My name is Scott McBride. I'm with Bolton & Mink, project manager for our consulting team, and I will be leading the presentation today. And I've got 2 colleagues with me. Hyla Mays will talk about the engagement portion, and Ross Tillman will talk about the concept portion. So they'll be up here in just a little bit. But first, let's go over a few ground rules. If you can hit the next slide, Hyla. I'm sure by this time we're mostly all familiar with this process of Zoom meetings. I will let you know that we are recording this session, so you should have seen something pop up on your screen at some point about that. So we are recording this, and we will be able to put it on the website afterwards. So please stay on mute during the presentation. Keep yourself muted. We do have a chat box, and we would encourage you to use that. If you have questions, feel free to ask questions, and we will answer them live as we can. So we have a number of staff online, and if we can answer your question right out of the box on the chat box, we'll do that. So stay tuned to the chat box for that. If you have questions, feel free to raise your hand, although we have plenty of time in this presentation for detailed questions. We will be going to breakout rooms that I'll talk about in just a little bit. So there's plenty of time to get into detailed answers to your questions. So with that, let's get into the overview. So next slide. The first thing I'll do is introduce Hennepin County Project Manager Josh Potter to talk a little bit about the partnership we have going on this project. Josh?
Yeah, thank you, Scott. Good evening, all. Just wanted to thank everybody for their time this evening. As noted here, we have many partners on this project. Certainly, I just want to note tonight as well, looking forward to hearing your feedback and just having further dialogue. So just greatly appreciate that moving forward here. As Scott noted, Josh Potter with Hennepin County Public Works project manager for this project.
Thanks, Josh. And you see the list of partners we have, and I'll talk a little bit about the area in a little. I do want to mention also that we have Luke Hansen on the phone as well from the city's project manager. So Luke is here to be a resource as well. We're doing this project in partnership with the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board. We'll talk a little bit about their scene trail here in a little bit. Metro Transit is a key partner of this as well, specifically with the Elan that is running right through this area. And MnDOT is a partner in this as well, because we intersect some MnDOT facilities. So next slide. Just what we're going to do today, as I mentioned earlier, I'm just going to provide a little bit of background and an overview of kind of how we've gotten to where we are today. And then we'll go through what we've done in terms of outreach, the analysis and evaluation piece that we have done with this process. And then we'll get into the recommended concept and talk about how we got that concept, what it is, some of the issues and impacts with it. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we intend to go to breakout sessions where we can get into some detailed questions about the project. So next slide, Hyla. And next. I want to get into just a little bit of history. Those of you who have been in the area for a while will likely remember that back in 2016, there was a technical study performed. That study was specifically looking at developing concepts to accommodate all users, not just automobiles within this corridor. And it analyzed a number of different alternatives. after going through that process, it actually did not result in a single recommendation of what to do out here. And it's worth noting that most of the remaining concepts require a full reconstruction. Next slide. So in 2018, the county applied for and received $5.5 million in federal funding for a fiscal year 2023 construction season. And so that funding was specifically, the purpose of that funding was to really align First and Hennepin to reflect the county and the city's goals, including installing bike lanes as a piece of more mobility options, and accessibility improvements. So improving and upgrading the pedestrian infrastructure, and then also upgrading the traffic signal systems out here, including APS for accessibility. And again, I mentioned earlier that the previous study was looking mostly at the full reconstruction alternatives. This is intended just to retrofit those bike lanes, accessibility improvements, and the signal systems. So next slide. So I think most of you are very familiar with this area, of course. Again, it was to implement a retrofitted bike facility on here between 8th Street on the, I guess you would call that the north and east side, all the way down to Main Street on both First and Hennepin. And so that's about a 7-block stretch. Again, this is an incredibly important area for this area because it's really a gateway to the suburbs. There is a lot going on here, including Central Avenue is owned by MnDOT. Mentioned earlier, Metro Transit has a number of transit lines and a proposed Elan rapid bus transit facility moving through this area. In the future, there will be another rapid bus line coming up Central Avenue as well. So it's really the intersection of a lot of both local, regional, as well as statewide transportation needs. And I want to also mention that we are in cooperation with the Minneapolis Park and Rec Board to implement the Seam Trail project, which is that little stub down on Main Street between First and Hennepin, and add that missing trail connection right in that area. Next slide. So there's a number of things about this current project that are important. One, we needed to develop the alternatives with this that were consistent with the federal funding requirements or the federal application that the county submitted. And so we evaluated those various alternatives against the project's goals and objectives, which I'll touch on in just a moment. We understand that there is a desire by some to do more out here on this, on both First and Hennepin, but we're currently limited by that retrofit scope. So I want to touch on the schedule on the next slide. So I mentioned earlier that we are at the very end of the planning phase of this. So we've been at this for a little while, since 2020 when we started this. We went through first phase of developing the existing conditions in the vision. Under the second phase, we developed, we tested, we evaluated the various concepts. And so we're here today at the end of phase 3, which is the preliminary design of the selected alternative. And the next phase after this, once we gather approvals for this phase, will be the rest of 2022 and into 2023 will be design and right-of-way acquisition if there is any needed, with construction starting in 2024. And we anticipate 1 year of construction. The next slide. Mentioned project goals and objectives earlier. We started out with objectives that really support the county and the city's current plans. So making a roadway corridor that is safer and more accessible to all people. This area is rich in multimodal types of modes. So we wanted to make sure we connected those. There is no bike path today on First and Hennepin. And so these connections are important. including transit connections as well. Mentioned the Elan earlier. We wanted to support active living and just overall environmental health of the area and the community. And then recognizing the current existing residential and business land use, we wanted to support those within that context and promote business development in the area. Next slide. And so with that, I will pass it over to Hyla, and we'll get into a little bit of the engagement and how we interacted with people through this process. Hyla.
Thanks, Scott. I'm going to go through a few slides here that sort of cover our strategy and our approach and sort of some very high level findings. It, of course, won't be possible to go into detail in every one of the comments we received, that we have big long logs of every detailed comment in our responses, but we certainly hope it gives you a sense of what we've heard. As we're pulling, as I should note from the get-go, we're wrapping this phase up, but we're not done. We're still wanting to hear comments today in the next few weeks to make sure that we're really getting a full picture. So please be listening for things that are familiar to you and also what you can add during this discussion. What you're looking at here is just a range of the strategies that were used out there right now in engagement over the past year and a half or so. We did attempt to have a sort of a normal path towards engagement early on, but with COVID, we had to pivot with a much stronger focus on online meetings. We know we're coming out at the other end and hopefully more in-person events in the coming phase. But a lot of this has really focused on being creative and effective in the digital realm, but also providing people lots of different ways to connect with staff, to ask questions, and to have set up conversations about key issues. The engagement strategy largely mirrors the process around the different stages of the project. Starting at the beginning with online engagement and online open house content during the earlier phases was focused on existing conditions and understanding the corridor. Goals came out of that by spring of 2021 with sort of more targeted discussion to refine those and really feature what is the most important pieces. You've already seen some of the goals to date. By winter of this sort of winter 21-22, we were at the point of providing a couple alternatives for review. And some of you may have been with us earlier when we sort of started going through the process of how these alternatives were developed, refined, and narrowed down to the concept you see today. We are currently in the phase where we are now of having a recommended concept that has evolved from this process and from the engagement to date. And as you've heard before, we're moving forward with the next stage soon. I'm going to just flash these numbers on the screen without going into them in detail, just to give you a sense of the scope of this engagement process. This is an interesting place, as all of you know, with residents that are key to the area and are close in, as well as businesses, but also a lot of people who are traveling through and using this place to get places, to visit, to work, to play, and to shop. So we made an attempt to reach as many people as we could within the area. Our partners, including New Publica and Forecast Public Artists, to help us try to broaden our engagement to not just the folks who are most connected, but to get a bigger picture from all of those impacted, including those who are historically underrepresented. The numbers here reflect the different efforts were made to do outreach and different conversations. The online mapping and online tools were used to sort of supplement the meetings we had in person and online as well. Phase 2 engagement, and I can say sort of bleeding into phase 3 because the line there is a little blurry, had additional meetings and surveys that were provide outreach to the community during that time period. Early 22 engagement, we don't have this all packaged up because we're kind of still formulating phase 3 and getting that done. So it's still in process. Has really focused on sort of a more detailed outreach to businesses and to property owners along the corridor and to others who are most impacted by the project. As this concept becomes more detailed, there's more specific conversations we want to have and will continue to have as this project goes forward. Just without going into all the details of the engagement, although we have plenty of documentation for those who are interested, here are the major themes we heard. A lot of them do reflect the goals, but some of them have a little bit more nuance to them. Safety and accessibility were easily on the front of the list. People who travel this corridor were concerned about traffic issues, about safety of crossing on foot, on bike, about the schools in the area, safe routes to school, and even about driving because there's a lot of operational challenges along the corridor. And indeed, anyone who travels through here knows that accessibility is also a major concern, especially with the lack of ADA accessible facilities and the presence of a significant population living with disabilities in the area, in addition to many others who need to have safe and accessible crossings. Active living and walkability also factored very highly in this. We know many people choose to live and work in this area because they love to be able to travel around here, connect to the trails, walk to destinations, and really access all there is to offer in this area. We need to understand this facility, and we certainly do from the city and county's policy perspective, as part of an interconnected network of systems that provide safe ways for people to access and enjoy the area. The continuation of the facilities for bikes and peds that you'll hear about shortly really are meant to build on that, including, of course, the connection to the regional trail through the SEAM project with the park board. Serving planned growth is also important. We've joked that it's hard to get a full typical read on some of these corridors because if you've been here for a while, you know, there seems that there's always something under construction. With all the development and all the people who've moved to this area, in addition to longtime residents and businesses, it's important to make sure the facilities are scaled up and appropriate, especially considering that many people do move here to be able to walk and bike in the area safely and to connect to destinations, as well as to go through and transit to the employment centers in the area. Streetscape and public realm also came up as very important. Some of these corridor areas are pretty tired, and we've even heard the neighborhood has made a priority. The neighborhood made a priority early on to say, even if no one else will do it, we are committed to greening this corridor. We hope that can be put on pause so that can be focused on this project. But the thought is definitely wanting to make this a greener, more sustainable corridor. You'll hear a bit later about stormwater features and other greening efforts to make sure that this is an attractive and pleasing environment as well as functional for all the modes. And last, but absolutely not least, business district support. People here, we've heard over and over again, people care about the small businesses inhabit this area and what make it special, and definitely thinking about how we're supporting them through this project and how this project allows their customers to get here safely and accessibly by all the modes is an important component. There's some details around that, around access and parking, which we'll cover later in the presentation, that reflect a focus specifically on the business needs. And indeed, earlier this year, there was a additional outreach that was focused specifically around that, which some of you may have been a part of. Did not want to go too in depth on those, but just to give you a sense of the type of themes we're hearing, and you'll hear from the rest of the presentation some other ways they have been incorporated in the design. At this point, I'm turning it back over to Ross right now. Is that next? So to talk about the recommended concept.
Yeah, let's dig in. If you go to the next slide. So we'll walk through the recommended concept here and then hit on some of the key features and how we got here. So everyone I'm sure is familiar, but the existing section of Hennepin and First is similar to what's shown on the screen here. 3 travel lanes in each direction, parking lane on each side, sidewalk generally on both sides, and no dedicated bike facility. This happens to be taken on Hennepin between 2nd and University. The corridors vary a bit, as you all know, block to block. So this is the block we're focusing on for the visuals in this presentation, at least. Next slide. And here is the street view of that block. So again, you can see the 3 travel lanes and the parking along the street here. Next slide. So the recommended concept, this looks pretty similar to what was shared at the previous open house as concept 2. Recommended concept has 2 general purpose travel lanes. So the left 2 lanes that are out there today would remain. 1 transit priority lane that would really take place of the rightmost lane. That lane would be shared with right turning vehicles at intersections, otherwise used for transit purposes. 1 parking lane would remain on the left side of the roadway as you're driving, and the separated bike lanes, that new bike facility would be on the right curb line of the roadway. Sidewalk could remain on both sides, and we're looking to fill the large sidewalk gap on the north side of Hennepin between Main and 2nd as well, this project. Next slide. And here's that same rendering from last time that we shared, again, just to give you a perspective of what this could look like. That same block on Hennepin, you can see how that bikeway facility ties into the rest of the roadway. It's at the same level as the street, but separated by a raised concrete, a really skinny raised concrete median, separating the bikes from vehicle traffic. Next slide. Here's getting into some of the 2D views here. Fully recognize that it's difficult to share a layout in PowerPoint format. And so everyone that's going to be running a breakout session has access to the actual PDF So if people have questions or want to cruise around the layout and look at different things, we can definitely do that. That's probably a good activity for those groups. But I can dig into this a little bit just to give you a context of what you're going to see. So lane widths in the transit lane, you can see the transit lane there in red on the right side of the roadway. Again, this is Hennepin between, in this case, Second University right in the middle there. Lane widths are going to be narrowed a bit from what's out there today. You can see some of the curb extensions, particularly on the north side of Hennepin there, those large gray areas are where we're actually going to be extending the curb line out into the roadway at corners. Provides more space for pedestrians, a better landing for accessibility. Pedestrians and bicyclists on those corners are more visible to traffic, and they shorten crossing. So they add a lot of safety components to the project. Those are spread across many of the intersections that you'll see. Transit stops are, of course, integrated into this design, and many of them are improved from what they are today, and possibly even shifted from where they're at today. So in this view, you can see the proposed Elan station at Second and Hennepin there for the BRT. And you can see the bikeway. It's that dark gray feature that wraps behind the bus stop. Really separates transit users from bicyclists who are separated from people walking in that area. That's pretty consistent with most of the transit stops in the corridor where we had room to do that. Green stormwater infrastructure and greening opportunities. You'll see little icons on the layout. In this case, you can see a couple just above where it says conceptual BRT station. There's a few different styles of icon. They're labeled on the layout, but they're really getting at opportunities for greening of the corridor, whether it's just green space, whether it's a space we can actually treat water. We're looking to identify those right now and actually integrate those into the design. So at this point, they're just shown as icons. As we dig into this further and detail this out, the actual areas in which those were going to fit will be detailed out as well. All right, next slide. So the triangle concept, again, is something we've talked about before. This was one of the focus areas for the team here, and working to find a solution to improve this complicated intersection. We received a lot of feedback early in the project about this location. And so we really tried to find a way to improve safety, reduce the complexity here, and at the same time, perhaps improve operations through this area as well. And so what we did is extended really the sidewalk through 5th Street in this area. So you see this peninsula that's formed right in the middle of the screen. It becomes a bit of a plaza for bicyclists and pedestrians who want to use this area. This is just an example of what it could look like. Certainly the details of landscaping and greening and streetscape will be figured out as we get into the details here more. But space is available for that. It's a nice mixing zone for non-motorized users in the area. This also provides a lot of opportunity from just a signal phasing and timing perspective to unlock some potential here at this intersection and make this operate better. So the next slide actually shows the same area from a top-down view. Just provided a bit of a different perspective there. Again, you can see that gray triangle piece extended out from where the Hennepin development is going in right now. That effectively cuts off vehicle traffic on 5th Street through here. Users can still weave through the area if they'd like, or reroute to go a different route to continue on 5th. Pedestrian and bicycle traffic can still use 5th Street and cut through here. You can see in this area, this is where the transit lane actually ends on Hennepin. So through the intersection, based on the available space north of Central, the transit lane actually drops. Otherwise, this is fairly consistent with what has been shown in the past. Curb extensions where we can, where they make sense. And the only other notable change is we are allowing, as it is today, a left turn from Central to 5th Street and from 5th Street onto Central. So just based on the unique nature of the roadway network in this area and needing to provide some access, because of that, we're retaining that movement here. The benefit with this concept compared to the existing condition is we're adding a left turn lane for those users on Central. So they're not making that left from a through lane. So it's a bit of a safety improvement there while still maintaining access. Next slide. So if you, like you've probably picked up on those typical sections and even what we shared at the previous open house, this concept does affect parking along Hennepin and First. And so with the repurposing of the roadway space and having that bike lane really installed on the right-hand side of the roadway, parking stalls are removed from on street on Hennepin and First. So that's about 86 stalls along both streets combined. It's about a 17% loss in on-street parking in the general area. And so we looked at not only just on Hennepin and First, but also about a block off. Next slide. So as you can imagine, in an area like this, there's a lot to consider. First and foremost, space was really one item that we thought a lot about as we developed all these concepts and came to this recommended concept. There's a lot of desire, a lot of different things to try to fit in a corridor like this that's fully developed. And so the modal priorities that have been set really at the city and county policy level really allowed us to make some key decisions along the way. Part of that is deciding, where can we add some separation? Where do we need to retain some flexibility and space along the corridors? One good example of that that you can see in the layout are the transit stops, the local transit stops. Where we have some room, we added separation to improve safety between the different modes at those. But where we didn't have room, those are more or less a standard flexible transit stop space where bikes and buses mix in the roadway there. Of course, we're considering ongoing maintenance needs. Whatever we build here needs to be able to be maintained. Otherwise, after a short period of time, it's not going to look very good. It's not going to function very well. And so we're working with city and county staff, Metro Transit staff, and MnDOT to make sure that what we're designing here is maintainable for the long run. And then I believe it was mentioned earlier, but just with the scope of this project being a retrofit, we realized that there may be a different ultimate long-term vision. And so what we're doing here really was intended to not preclude something further from occurring in the future. Next slide. Just a couple other key points. The concept development process here, of course, as Hyla mentioned, we're working to incorporate engagement we received over the past 2 years. So we got a lot of good feedback from folks that helped play into the decision-making process here. County and city planning documents and policies both have a lot of documentation around modal priorities and splits as it relates to just those priorities and climate. Minneapolis Vision Zero Action Plan also has highlighted these streets as high injury networks. And so really we tried our best to add as many different safety improvements in this project as we could within the confines of our scope. And the last bullet there, I think, is an important one that based on the work that's been done with this project, we expect the operations from a traffic perspective to actually improve, even though we're reducing one of the general purpose lanes. There's a few key reasons for that. One being the triangle improvement that was mentioned before, that does unlock potential there with the signal phasing. So there will be a noticeable improvement in delay if you're driving on the street, you're taking a bus through there. On First Avenue, there's some weaving that occurs, some needed weaving that occurs right now as you approach the river. Those lane shifts are removed with this project. And also this provides a nice opportunity to just retime the signals after the project is built. So we do expect that this project will actually improve operations and get people through here as efficiently as one can. I think this might be relevant based on a comment I just saw come in. So next slide, Hyla. We did hear that there was some desire to transition these roadways to two-way streets. This project is maintaining the one-way street network here, just again within the confines of what we're doing from a retrofit perspective. So that scope and budget were important as part of that decision-making process. But there have been a lot of things implemented to improve accessibility. Hyla went through this a bit, but all the ADA improvements we're looking at adding here, both from a corner, like a physical corner perspective, and also the signal infrastructure, will help those users with disabilities navigate the area way more safely and efficiently. We have many different traffic calming features built into this project. I mentioned before, we're narrowing the lanes. That can have a calming effect on traffic. We're removing both of the channelized right turns, one being from Central to First and one being from First to Main Street. Those channelized right turns really allow for high-speed turning movements where you're conflicting with potentially people walking across the street. And so it's a pretty big safety improvement in an area like this to actually remove those. And then I mentioned earlier the curb extensions. It makes the roadway feel tighter for those driving on it, which can have a calming effect. And then many different things for pedestrian safety. Maybe most notably though, pedestrian and bicycle safety. Most notably, the dedicated facilities we're providing, as well as the curb extensions, as I mentioned. Shortening those crossings and making those users most visible to people driving is important. So that's all part of this concept that you'll see. Next slide. So managing curbside space, there's a lot of different existing and future needs for the curbside space out here. So these are the items that were considered as we went through this process. Of course, transit facilities, we've been talking about that a bit. Usage is expected to increase here with the BRT going through the area. On-street parking, of course, is a current use of curbside space on both sides of Hennepin and First. We have drop-off loading areas for different businesses throughout the network. And as we really looked at this, we considered it from basically a entire business district perspective, so parking as a whole. That's why I mentioned earlier about a 17% loss of on-street parking overall. The work that we did as part of this process really identified the available parking supply off of Hennepin and First, up to a block off of Hennepin and First, and having an adequate supply there to offset some of the loss on mainline Hennepin and First. So next slide. Some information on enhanced transit through here. So we are incorporating the Metro Transit recommendations for Elan platforms at 2nd Street, so both on Hennepin and First Avenues. Dedicated the transit priority lanes, as I mentioned, are part of this project. Improved bus stops, so not only at the BRT stations, but also the local stops. Those local stops are either staying where they are today or moving to a slightly better location based on the other improvements that are happening, but those stops are largely being improved as well. And then really just planning for likely increased frequency, of course, with the BRT, but increased ridership as well. There's about 5,000 people that ride a bus through this corridor each day. In past BRTs that have been implemented, ridership has been seen to increase by up to 30%. So it's a pretty large number of people that travel through here via transit. So it's important for this project to make improvements as we could to that mode as well. Next slide. And then just a few keynotes for people, just realizing that a lot of things aren't fully, or some things aren't fully determined yet. So streetscaping and the opportunities for greening. So that the first and last bullet there I mentioned, we have some symbology on the layout right now. That's where we think right now there's great opportunity to do that. There may be more. Some of those may fall off as we get into the details, but we're going to work on detailing that out moving forward and what can go where. Ongoing Elan bus rapid transit coordination with Metro Transit. Of course, as things are finalized with that planning, making sure that our project incorporates that as needed. Coordination with other projects, so beyond BRT, we're not operating in a vacuum here, and so there will be other projects occurring, generally in a similar time frame as this one, and also future projects as well that we're trying our best to accommodate with this design as we can. So those future projects can tie into this work. And then construction staging impacts. We're not really at a point where anything detailed is known. Scott mentioned earlier that we're thinking right now it's a one-year construction project, but any details on staging or a specific impacts at this point aren't known. So more information to come on that. I think that's it. So I don't know if Scott or Hyla is going to kick off the breakout rooms.
Yeah, I can chat a little bit about that. And I do want to acknowledge the chat in there about the two-way. This is an ongoing conversation we've had as a project team with the neighborhood, and the city is having with the council member as well. We absolutely understand that the two-way is very important to a number of people through here, and we looked at that early on. And bottom line is, this project cannot, one, afford, and two, absorb the impacts of that kind of a change at this time. So this project was very specific to be a multimodal improvement here, and that's what the project is doing. We're very careful to make sure that when that two-way project does want to happen here, recognizing that people want it to happen now, that we're not precluding that it will be able to happen. And that's just simply a different process than this process. So we recognize that it's very much a priority for a lot of people. And we don't anticipate that this project will hold that back at all. So if we go to the breakout rooms here, I want to introduce Madeline to everybody. Madeline has been our wizard behind the screen. She's controlling the Zoom, and she's gonna perform some magic here, and we're all going to be able to go to breakout rooms. We can further that conversation, or look at the layout, or have just basically entertain whatever questions you may have about this. And we've got some prompting questions as well. So Madeline, what do we need to do to make this happen?
Yeah, so I'm just going to click open all rooms. There will be a button that says join room, and you'll just click OK, and magic, you'll be in a little small group for discussion. So about to do that now.
What we'll do now is just take about 2 minutes per group and have a recorder just give a little synopsis of what happened there. I don't know if I can do this in 2 minutes. We had a good conversation, a lot of good questions. So I'll start off by saying the first thing we talked about is parking, and it's just some concern about some of the parking in the area, and will there be spots for overnight? We had a discussion there about the city of Minneapolis's kind of new ordinance on parking, and while we didn't have an expert in there, we talked about that as a piece. Providing additional bike parking is necessary in this area, so that's a part of the overall strategy for reduction of parking. And so that was a pretty good conversation right off the bat. I had a question about street lights, and there's some gaps there, some dark spots in the area, and Josh noted that we will be looking at lighting with this project, looking at the potential for filling in some of those gaps. And also making sure that those were directional, as we do for all of our installations these days. They point down, not up, to eliminate some light pollution. Had a comment that we should put this process on hold until we can figure out the two-way issue. Some real passion around that issue. A fear that installing this project would cause that two-way conversation to be pushed many years down the road. So that was a fairly strong comment in our room. With others wondering kind of what happens at the transitions, since they're not two-way across the bridge, and how does that work? So we had a little bit of a conversation about that. Noted that there was a kind of a nasty fatality on the Hennepin Bridge once because somebody turned the wrong way down a one-way street. So just wondering about, is there a way to better sign and better announce to people that they are on a wrong-way street, or a one-way street rather. We looked at the layout a little bit, concern about if you're southbound on First coming into Maine, that big swinging right turn that just doesn't feel safe. Because cars kind of speed around that corner. So we pulled the layout up and shown that we're actually addressing that by really reducing the radius on that curve. So people will need to slow down to make that curve. The triangle concept, wondered about, what if you are on Fifth and you'll want to go through? How do you do that? And noted that we have made provision to be able to take a left on Fifth, off of Fifth onto Hennepin, and be able to make that right onto Central, and then a left on Fifth, so that that movement is available fairly easily. So that's, and also wondered about turn arrows for those types of movements. And we noted that as we upgrade the traffic signals within the corridor, we've got the ability to address each intersection individually and make sure that we have the appropriate signal system in place. Wondered about the conversation about the transit lane. Would parking be allowed in there on a part-time basis, like at a non-peak type of basis? And we noted that that is a piece of the conversation. We haven't gotten that far yet. That'll be something that'll be discussed down through the design process. Had a comment about the spots where the bike lane leaves the roadway, comes up onto the sidewalk to get behind the transit stations. What do we do there for visually impaired people? And so we noted the current standards and changing standards about putting some kind of a tactile barrier in there, so that a visually impaired person could delineate the difference between the bike lane and the sidewalk. And as I was writing furiously, that's where I ended. Did I miss anything, Josh, or anybody else in our group? Did I skip over anything?
Great summary, Scott. Thank you.
Thanks. If not, we can go to the second group. I'm not sure who the second group is. Let's go with Mark and Ross.
Okay. And Ross, please amplify, correct me, anything else as I go. I think I'm going to touch maybe more on things that Scott, you didn't cover, if they were kind of the same. There was a question about, do the traffic conditions improve? Does that include lower speeds and safety? And Ross clarified that, really the increased efficiency and the consistency throughout the corridor are important, as well as the extended curbs. Question came up about rates of speed, and that is a city decision that would be considered by the city if considerable in the future. People were asking, can it be 25? Can it be 20? So narrow lanes, curb lines do calm. Question came up related to, well, when the bridge is still the same speed, is there a project for the Hennepin Bridge? And maybe there's some study about it in the future, but it's not in the scope of this project. So the concern is that people will just get back to high speeding when they achieve or arrive at the bridge. Question came up is, how much engagement have we done with the businesses and what has been their response? The businesses did tend to want the two-way conversion, as well as minimize or mitigate the access to parking, and conversations will continue to look for any possible opportunities for that. Question came up, and we didn't have a Metro Transit person. Maybe that person isn't on this call. Has there been any data studying the compliance of regular vehicle drivers of not using the dedicated or prioritized transit lane to see about its workability, or is there any data that could be given? And then some folks think that transit priority lanes could reduce more parking. Is there any other data on transit lanes in other places where parking has been affected? One person, mostly bikes, but had a very, very interesting parallel to somebody parking in a Walmart parking lot to go to the door of Walmart, and that distance is similar to him parking on Northeast 3rd Avenue to go down to the heart of this corridor, saying that people can find some parking if they're willing to walk a distance that is smaller than this big parking lot. So again, it's about activity and mobility. Ross, would you like to highlight anything else that I'm missing?
I think the only one that I've got that was unique was the question about whether or not the signals could ultimately be timed more for bikes than vehicles. So for that difference in speed. But a good summary, Mark, otherwise.
Okay. Anyone else in that group see anything that was missed?
Yeah. I wanted to clarify another aspect of, I think, Amber's comment about vehicles in the transit lanes. One aspect of that I heard or I interpreted as is also the issue of cars that are turning right, kind of stacking up in the bus lane and preventing buses from being able to get through when they're, because even on a green light, with the amount of pedestrian activity in this area, I think what I was, or at least what I heard and what I have concerns about is whether that could be an issue, because there's so many pedestrians that cars end up sitting waiting for a long time to turn right.
Thank you. All right, let's go to our third group. I've got Luke and Brian.
Thanks, Scott. And, I think there are some very similar themes in our group as well. And I'll note, we also had a discussion about, implementing two-way streets rather than one-way. Also heard some concerns about the associated parking loss with the safety improvements proposed here. We also heard some support, for the cross-section and layout that we displayed tonight, and specifically for those improvements for, protected bikeways, for bump outs, those kind of reduced crossing distances at intersections in transit. There were some questions about, our ability to hold off on different parts of this proposal until, we could maybe figure out a two-way and, maybe hold off on pieces of the bikeway or some other components of the project. We also had a kind of, real quick in the weeds conversation just about some of the federal funding responsibilities from our project's perspective and some of those associated limitations with the work. Some conversation about, First and Fifth still is a dangerous intersection. There's been a lot of feedback, any consideration for a semaphore or a traffic signal, and kind of noted that's a longstanding and ongoing conversation with the city and county. Some discussion of the triangle concept at Hennepin and Fifth, and I'd say generally supported, but also some really, I think, good conversation about, how our design has changed since our last engagement effort to accommodate, Ray J's and access to Fifth Street. That was a good conversation. A lot of feedback noting that eliminating the slip lane and free ride at First and Main is a much needed safety improvement and is a very uncomfortable environment to walk or bike today. Again, some conversations about a two-way bike lane on Hennepin, and we were able to kind of talk through our earlier engagement efforts and how we identified that as a possibility, but ultimately didn't recommend that for a variety of reasons. And then had some conversations about transit improvements at First and Fifth, and just kind of noted that that bus stop and shelter will be moving. But at Sixth and Fourth, the new kind of proposed locations, the bus accommodations will be improved to the existing stop at First and Fifth today. And Brian, any pieces I missed there from our conversation?
That's great, Luke. Thank you.
All right. Thanks all, with emphasis at the end. I wanted to address a question I see in the chat here from Amber about the sidewalk elevation versus curb protected lanes. Our goal was to keep the bike lanes curb protected at street level, but the issue comes at every bus stop then, where you need the curb to go out to meet the bus stop for accessibility, or to meet the bus for accessibility. So that necessitated us to, the safest design there then is to pull the the bike lane up on the curb behind the bus stop, and then move it back to the street level when it's safe to do so. So that's the reason we did that. And then I've got the last group, Hyla and Vartun.
Yes, so we had a couple of residents, business owners, and a member from a neighborhood group. A lot of the same conversations as well. I'll try to match the tone of the participants in our group. And hopefully, if not me, Hayla will share any missed comments. So around parking, we heard about privately owned parking versus the public, and that was a major concern around Sturdix, around travel lanes. We talked about limited lanes without cones, as there are some cones right now, and so issue in the future when those cones are not available or removed. And then around Elan, there has been conversation about the project and not appropriately approaching where stops should be, as it tries to accommodate too much all at once within the same space. And then Elan, the Elan stop between Hennepin and Central takes away parking in front of little shops. So that was a concern. And then there was a conversation around green space. And so where will the green space or the space for green space come from when there's not enough sidewalk for folks?
I can add just a couple more things. I think we're both taking notes at the same time, so we were tag teaming a bit. Some discussion about traffic congestion, which I think was mentioned by another group as well. Ensuring that there's understanding that if you're taking a line of traffic away, it's being done with all due diligence to understand that there's the forecast and the modeling reflects current understanding and recent growth to ensure that we're not worsening congestion out there with the scenario. Definitely a consideration about making sure that there's local benefit from this project. So this area, which has been growing as an urban place, investing in the area and making some decisions, that those decisions are supported and augmented by this, and it's not working counter to the vision for making a great community. I'm certainly not thinking that it should be just about facilities that serve a broader purpose, but also what serves the residents in the area. We did have some questions, and if there's a way to respond to them, to have a little bit of feedback on the Elan transit station location discussion, because I know that's of interest to a lot of people on here about how that decision was made and concerns about that. Some of the people were part of previous discussions, but maybe wanting and ensuring that we have plenty of clarity as to why that was decided, and if there's other alternatives that could be viable, that those are being fully vetted out, including spaces that seem, at least to some folks, they might be a better fit. And again, I think there are other comments as well, but most of them largely, I think, align with the other conversations, unless there was someone in our group that thought we skipped something.
Great, thanks. Thanks to that group. I'm going to take a run down through the chat comments here and see if we can address some of these questions that have come up. Scott's asking about does the plan convert Fifth Street to one-way? And we do not anticipate doing that at this time. We're showing a two-way Fifth Street. I'll say to the kind of the west of Hennepin. And Angela just noted the BRT stop on First and Second, and I think Kyla just went through that. Essentially, Metro Transit is working hard on that. It's I'll call it kind of an E-line decision. They're working with the city on that particular issue. This project is able to accommodate it in a number of different locations. So we're kind of sitting back and waiting for that decision to play out with Metro Transit. So we'll accommodate that as it is. John points out or asks for a little bit more information on the traffic study, and maybe I could ask Ross just to talk a little bit about how some of the assumptions we made in the traffic study and how that plays out with the two travel lanes versus the transit lane.
If I'm mute, yeah, I hard to really get into details verbally, I guess, but we looked at both the historic volume sort of profile on Hennepin and First, and also what it could be 20 years from now. Really, those numbers are all about the same. There hasn't been a lot of change, even with all the development in this area. to traffic volumes on Hennepin and First throughout the years. So we're expecting it to remain relatively consistent moving into the future. That's probably part of this. I mentioned before the triangle itself, that's maybe a bit nuanced. It's a 3-phase signal. It's the only signal in the corridor that has 3 separate green phases for different roadways. And so that takes more time out of if you imagine a pie, each road gets a third instead of each road getting roughly a half. So that really helps progression along Hennepin. And so the ability of the triangle to reduce that signal to 2 phases does provide quite a bit of benefit just to keep vehicles kind of going along a green band on Hennepin instead of just waiting unnecessarily at the triangle. The other things I mentioned too, the ability to retime both really the entire corridor with the project will help traffic as much as possible. I know the question came up earlier about, well, can we time it for bikes? I think that's an interesting question that can be vetted through the process as well. But yeah, I don't know if there's a specific question. It's hard to, like I said, maybe show anything with that on the screen right now.
Yeah, thanks, Ross. There's a lot of thought that was put into that, and I appreciate that update. I did want to note that there are a couple of comments of support in there for the multimodal aspect of things. And Brett asked, could Ross restate what he mentioned about growth along Hennepin there in terms of traffic growth, I assume?
Yeah, and Brett, I don't have the volumes in front of me to quote numbers, but generally the volume, the total number of vehicles that use Hennepin and First hasn't changed a whole lot in the past. And we're not anticipating it changing much in the future. So the total number of vehicles using these roadways is expected to remain pretty consistent as we plan for this improvement.
Yeah, and I see John said something about street trees. We haven't got that far into kind of the greening process yet. That'll happen over the next year or so. And making a comment about great urban streets, which of course is what we're trying to do here. Tell you what, Hilo, why don't you put up that last slide there, and I will go through the last slide, which is just next steps, and then we'll just open it back up and for any other conversation. So this is a quick one. So, we mentioned that we do have a lot of design refinement to happen. We mentioned a number of different things. We're waiting on a decision for the bus stop, for instance, the greening of the corridor aesthetically. What's it going to look like? Are there some green infrastructure and drainage things that we can do to improve? So there are a lot of details to come. Importantly, as those details are being made, we intend to continue with the outreach that we've had here, continue talking to the neighborhoods, continue talking to the businesses, targeting specific businesses and residents as well, to try to get as much input as we can throughout that design process. We anticipate that the layout going to the city for approval next month in July. And that really kicks off the final design portion of this, which I mentioned earlier, will be happening at as soon as that layout gets approved, and will occur through a portion of 2023. We would anticipate a later 2023 letting with construction in 2024. So those are the timelines and the next step in this, and we're not going anywhere with this project. We'll continue to talk as we develop those design details. We'll uncover more things in the design that need your input as well as we go through this. So stay tuned there, and Hila, I think you can pull the screen off, and then we'll continue the conversation. I was not able to follow the chat as we went through there, so I think there were some other chats coming in. Some comments about parking there. support for retaining and having more parking. And the question, will the street layout presented tonight be added to the website? The answer is yes. Is it there already? Do we know if it's there now?
Scott, it is not there, but we are working on adding that this week to the website.
Great, thank you. Question about the traffic model there, Ross, did you see that?
Yeah, I mean, Brian, yes and no. I mean, a good question came up in our focus group about leading pedestrian intervals. That's something that the project is looking at potentially adding as well. That can help reduce wait times a bit for those walking and biking perhaps, and make those crossings safer. But we didn't specifically measure, like a travel time for someone walking down the corridor or biking for that matter.
So I will note that we're done with our presentation. We were slated to go until 8 o'clock. We will be here till 8 o'clock. So if you have no more questions, you're free to leave at any time. Get on with your evening. Otherwise, feel free to go ahead and unmute and ask questions if you like. We don't need to confine it to the chat if you do have questions. We'll be happy to answer whatever questions you have. Yeah, I should note that I see John's comment there. We will, of course, be concerned with underground drainage, especially if we start to move curbs or get into catch basins. We definitely will be concerned with that. But when we say green infrastructure, it is more that kind of above ground kinds of things that we can do to treat water and do different things and green the corridor. I do want to note that I think it was Needna actually had something going on with I think it was Minneapolis Parks to actually improve some street trees and add some. We kind of paused that pending this project because we didn't want to have that happen and then come in and need to impact those brand new trees. So we hope that we'll be able to continue to work with them as we reconstruct this to actually help to implement the plan that they had. Discussion with parcel owners on public purchase of already established parking areas. It's a way to improve, augment the lack of removal of parking that is. My guess is we have had no conversations. Luke, are you aware of any conversations about parking with private owners?
No, outside of maybe some conversations about how you could market the existing kind of off-street parking along the corridor. But outside of that, there hasn't been any kind of conversations for public-private partnerships in that way, Scott.
Yeah, and Dan asks here about kind of that diagonal or scattered crossing where, if I'm understanding you correctly here, that would be kind of an all red phase, which allows pedestrians to go in any direction they want. We have not talked about that yet for this project. We're certainly not that far along, and I'm not sure where that conversation is citywide. It's a great question. I've seen that in other places. It works great in some locations, but I'm not sure what that conversation has been as a city. Other questions?
I have a question. Can I ask without typing?
Oh, that's perfect. Yeah. Then I don't have to read. Hello? Uh-oh, did he freeze up?
I think Brett may have frozen us.
Oh no, right as he was gonna start talking to us. That's too bad.
If I may, in the interim, do you have a plan for what the connection is on Main Street between Hennepin and First?
Main Street between Hennepin and First. We actually do. Ross, are you able to pull that piece of the layout up?
I assume the question was about the trail facility. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay, yep. So bear with me here. And everyone see that?
Yeah, it's up.
Okay. So yeah, if you're going along the river, northbound on the existing facility, that's going to widen really approximately, I don't know, pretty close to Hennepin here. And that new two-way shared use path will be on the riverside of Main Street. We're not planning on removing that existing guardrail that you see on the riverside. We're essentially going to be moving the curb line in closer to the middle of the roadway. That's a very wide space right now, wide lane, wide shoulder that we're repurposing to do this without getting into that slope and the trees and the guardrail in there. So it's intended to be a 12-foot wide shared use path, has a boulevard space in there as well. That'll likely be greened. And then as you go north through the intersection, bikes will be signed to actually cross Main to get onto the shoulder of Main Street going north, as they would be today. People walking will stay on the riverside and just continue on the sidewalk when you get past the project here. We are setting this up so that it can receive a future two-way bike facility on the riverside of Main Street if that gets built in the future. But for right now, it's a bit of an interim condition until that happens, specifically for northbound bicyclists. If you're southbound biking on Main, you'll be on the shoulder, come over onto the shared use path as you hit First Avenue, cross at the light, stay on that path, cross at the light again, and then keep going south along the river.
So is the intent to have the bicycles on this path south of Hennepin? It's a brick path today. It's in a historic district. Would it not make sense that it's brick all the way up to Hennepin to tie in with the brick path that's there? And someone's gonna have to decide how to go from a 12-foot bike lane and a 5'5" sidewalk down to a 5-foot sidewalk, south of Hennepin. So that's probably a park board question, but it should be a historic quality pavement surface, not asphalt and bituminous right there. If you could go back up to the corner of First and Main Street, you said you're narrowing down that radius, but yet you're leaving what, 40 feet of pavement? That's ridiculous. I mean, if we're going to have a curb line, make green space behind the curb line, that's not part of a sidewalk so it's stormwater underneath. Then make it green up on top. That's going to look like crap. It's going to, so if that's going to be a radius that quote Hennepin County says is needed for trucks, well then figure that out and plant it appropriately. That is not a design. That entire strip between Second Street and Main Street, you talk about overstating urban pavement. It's crazy. That is just crazy.
I think you're just misinterpreting the layout. What's shown here in gray is the removal of that free right, and it's shown as sidewalk color right now. These symbols are meant to indicate that the plan and the intent is to do something in this space. It's not just concrete. We just don't quite know yet what the exact dimensions of that are going to look like. That's really the next phase for us. But we definitely agree with you that should not be all concrete there.
It's tough to look at a plan and say what's not there. If we're asking to have a plan that's been in the works for 3 years, and not have a concept landscape plan to correspond. To me, this is the perfect plan to start putting in the street trees, start spacing them out. How are they going to be treated? How are their roots going to be taken care of? We're getting half the picture. Thank you.
Well, to be honest, I don't know if that was John speaking. I think you're getting a lot less than half the picture right now, because those design details are yet to occur, and which is exactly why we're not placing things exactly where they should go, because we don't know yet. We don't know until we really get into it. Right now, all we have is what you see here, a two-dimensional picture of this. The next step is to get into 3 dimensions and actually understand the real impacts of this. When we understand the real impacts of this, that's when we can pull back and say, okay, here are spots to do exactly what you're talking about. So I think we're going to get there. We're just not there yet. And it's just the process, the part of the process that we're in right now.
As a landscape architect, seeing too many plans get shut down from pavement and underground utilities and budget, if this is going to be a plan, there needs to be a robust urban landscape plan at this concept stage that's part of this plan of the 5.5 million. If we're not going to rebuild these streets and we're going to do this retrofit, there needs to be an urban landscape plan that is long overdue for this area that has had street trees die and never been replaced. We are long overdue for a plan. Thank you.
All right. Thanks for your perspective, John.
If you could zoom in on the southbound Main Street at First, just how I take, because of the current conditions, I usually take 3rd Avenue Northeast on my bike to get to Marshall or Main Street, and then go south on Main Street to First Avenue and then cross the river. And it's pretty wide currently, and I just kind of wonder if that right turn lane right there, the southbound right turn lane, could be just completely eliminated, because I think that southbound straight ahead lane could be combined with right turns, and it would just really improve the safety of that and reduce the crossing distance of westbound First at Main Street. So just a thought. It would increase the trail width too.
Yeah, thanks, Jared. It's a good thought.
Question here, if I may.
Yeah, go ahead, Brett. You're back.
Regarding, I'm sorry about that.
No worries.
The pad went kaput. So that same area, is that a build out of the existing sidewalk between Main Street and First? Is that right? Where the proposed station is? Yeah, right there to the right there, or to the east. Is that coming out further? Is there more sidewalk being added there? Is that the point?
Brian, do you by chance, Brian Shrove, have an idea of the dimensioning there? I assume that this line here, it's hard to see with the aerial and how we shaded this, but the backside of this is the backside of the walk today. I'm not sure exactly if this curb line is exactly in the same place. It's probably very close to where it is today.
Okay, so
It's not close. The sidewalk at that location is as wide as that 8-foot sidewalk. So that bike lane and the gray with the double line of proposed curb is all pavement, street pavement today.
That's okay. That's what I thought. So my question is, you have a dedicated transit lane that runs from up the street, starts at, does it start at 5th and 1st? Is that where the dedicated lane starts?
It actually starts on 7th Street.
Oh, excuse me. Okay.
Layover. Yeah.
Okay. So I recognize the addition of the bike lane, but you're also adding to that area the stop. Well, Metro Transit is. So you're having to add to that area a location, to that location space that has already been dedicated out front of the 2 new developments that already exist. So why try to cram the sidewalk and the bike path, behind a bus stop, and have to build out onto the street already, to make room for that new stop when you already have that space available to you at the new development with Nordhaus. I mean, I know there are people who don't like the idea of it being at Nordhaus, but the point is the design of those buildings was, part and parcel with the small area plans vision, and to provide space for those very things to occur. So why are we trying to, squeeze into a small area a bike lane and diminish an already wide walking path, which connects to, as I mentioned in our discussion, a major artery of interconnection within the neighborhood. That intersection at Main and Northeast or First Avenue is a huge collection point for walkers and bikers alike because of the trails. And with the connection, the new connection, it's only going to further the liveliness at that intersection. So now all of a sudden we add to that a bus stop, which I'm very much in favor of the BRT and what it has the potential to do to the neighborhood. But why not incorporate that bus stop into what the neighborhood has already done to accommodate those types of things? Am I making myself clear?
I guess I'm not following exactly what you're saying.
The point is
Could
the
you take a
space
little
has
run
already
at it?
been allocated for those types of, if you wanted a bus stop, you already have a wider promenade at Nordhaus. It was intentionally built that way, based off of design parameters that the small area plan stipulates. So moving the bus stop further west means that we have to squeeze into a smaller space, more people to accommodate on and offing of buses, people who already use the sidewalk, and now you're adding a bike lane to that area. Furthermore, the people who use those parcels already, who live in those homes, are now going to have to share access space with commuters. And so if somebody has a delivery, where does that delivery go? That delivery goes up onto Northeast 2nd, parks, and then brings the trolley down the hill so they can access the garage. This is not a NIMBY argument. This is just a logical kind of stream of conscious here. I just have a hard time understanding.
Hey Brett.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna jump in. I linked in the
Perfect.
chat earlier the Metro Transit's analysis of the bus rapid transit stop.
Yeah.
I don't know if you read there. It's pretty
No, of
thorough.
course I did. That's why I'm frustrated, because those answers that they provided were ridiculous. I mean, come on.
Hey everyone, sorry, I can jump in here too. This is Kyle Donald Burrows at Metro Transit, and happy to kind of speak to some of those questions.
Thank you, Kyle.
At a high level, yeah, Brett, thanks for your questions, and I think, excuse me, pardon me for my voice here, but so I think you raised some good points and some good questions, and I really appreciate your engagement through this process and through the Elan process. I think one of the key things here that I just want to highlight, and I won't go through every kind of detail here that we've looked at this location, but the key piece that we need to be thinking about is not only like site-specific feasibility, but overall station location feasibility within the overall corridor and within the overall transit network. And so the platform locations here at 2nd Street Northeast really try to balance that station spacing location between the Central Avenue station location, which is the station sort of preceding this location. And then the next farthest along station is in downtown Minneapolis at 2nd Street North. So between Central Avenue and 2nd Street North, it's about it's like 9/10 of a mile. So we needed to kind of find a space for a station within those 2 points. If you're sliding farther and farther up along First Avenue here, closer to Nordhaus there, that is essentially duplicating. It's too close to Central Avenue, the southbound Central Avenue platform location. It's about it's like 1.5 of a mile. So essentially duplicating the service area, the walk and roll shed of that Central Avenue location. We've of course worked with city staff and with county staff on a number of the concerns raised about pedestrian movements through here and loading and the bike platform, or sorry, the bike and platform interaction. As you can kind of see on other elements of this layout here, that is a standard design that is applied in a number of locations, both in Elan platforms and in other locations throughout both this project and throughout the region. So that's kind of a high level aspect. I think the other piece that I'll kind of just close on here is we're trying to balance that access that I mentioned earlier. So to the residential and commercial activities on this part of the segment closer to the river, as well as to key destinations, including De La Salle High School, which is of course on Nicollet Island, so outside of this segment here. But at this platform location, it's within a 5-minute walk or roll of the platform location at 2nd Street Northeast, where there would be a farther walk than sliding up onto the Nordhaus location. Pre-pandemic here in this platform location, this bus stop location at 2nd Street, it's one of the highest ridership bus stop locations in this corridor. There was about 215 ons, so people getting on the bus per day southbound here. And so another thing we look at is where do we have high ridership station locations today? Those are a good indicator of where we want to have BRT stations in the future. We're looking for those. So I won't take up too much more time on the overall piece here, but those are kind of some.
Can I just rebut and then I will let it go? I appreciate those, and I believe me, I've read the report. I don't want to sound naive because I'm not an engineer, but so maybe I am sounding naive. But there is already precedent throughout the BRT for not having stops meet the criteria. So I understand the argument that we want them to be spaced appropriately, but you happen to have 2 of the city's primary motor vehicle arteries running through the smallest neighborhood in Minneapolis. It makes sense that if there were going to be a shorter distance between stops, it would likely occur at least in one location in this neighborhood. Second of all, the stop that you mentioned on Central, the stop that you mentioned on Northeast 2nd, right? The high ridership will be moving to the new BRT station, correct? So, there's issues with that bus having to turn right onto an already narrow street path. But regarding ridership, this is the largest issue. NEBNA serves the heart of the ridership. NEB, the neighborhood, right? People who go to De La Salle or who work at De La Salle, I understand, The distance between those two stops is 1.5 city blocks. I mean, to suggest that it's a much further walk, I think is, it's not, right? It's like a 1/10 of a mile, less than 1/10 of a mile, maybe. Anyway, furthermore, my primary issue here is that we're serving Metro Transit by bringing BRT into the neighborhood. And along with this project, it's disrupting our neighborhood. So while we will grow from the BRT being here and value will be brought to the neighborhood, I don't think it's out of the question that the neighborhood ask that the BRT station serve the neighborhood. Bringing it further into the neighborhood means that we have greater access to businesses. De La Salle as a whole, that ridership, there may be a lot of ridership there, but the heart of the neighborhood drives ridership. So I appreciate the arguments that have been made by Metro Transit, but they seem to fall short of addressing the neighborhood's primary issue. Thank you. Primary issues, sorry.
Thanks, Brett.
Thanks.
And I just to rebut Brett's rebuttal. Yeah, the previous stop before is basically in the heart of the neighborhood where the main commercial area is. So I think, yeah, the BRT stops, they did their homework, Metro Transit. I like them where they're at.
One thing I wanted to note about that westbound First Avenue and Second Street stop where it is right now on the map is it's kind of like a good catch-all. I've personally caught the bus there trying to go downtown. I think it was during a snowstorm, and I thought to myself, well, which bus is coming next? You know, the 6, the 4, the 61, or is the 11 going to come first? The 11 comes down second. So there's like currently there's 2 different stops. So if you make it past the intersection where it is right now, it's like a great catch-all spot where you can, I saw somebody else put in the chat, I think John put in the chat that it's a 50-cent zone. So that's another, it's a place where everybody can kind of go, and you're like, if you do just want to go downtown, it'd be 50 cents, and you don't have to worry about the 11 coming on the other side of Second Street, and oh shucks, I gotta wait another 10 minutes or something. So but the freight thing, maybe the delivery people could just bring a dolly cart and bring some of the packages to the north side of First between Main and Second, or even the high rise on the south side. So I know it's frustrating when delivery drivers are always trying to find a place to park, and it's important to have a place for them to park too. So thanks.
Say one thing I want to note for folks that are making comments, as I mentioned early on, we are in a comment period right now. So we have more information online. We will have the map online very shortly. I highly encourage you to go to the website. It's hennepin.us/hennepin-and-first. You can just Google it, and I'm sure you'll be able to find that. But go on there and make your comments on that map. Write them down. We're recording things here. We've got the chat recorded as well. Thanks, Isla. We've got the chat recorded as well. So we've got a record of the comments here, but please feel free to hit the link that's being shown there. Thanks, Josh. And make your comments online. That's a very good thing for us, for the public record. We very much appreciate that. So with that, we're at about 8 o'clock. Any last questions before we sign off?
If I may, Scott, you mentioned this was 2023 funding for the project. Is this funding in jeopardy if it does not get constructed in 2023?
Thanks, John. The answer is yes, kind of. This funding, it comes through the Metropolitan Council. and they are pretty strict about their year that they construct in. You can go back, and if there's a good reason, you can get a 1-year extension to that. I'm not aware that they go past a 1-year extension for a good reason. And to your earlier comments, they are very, very specific about what they use their money to buy in. And in this case, it was these bike lanes on First and Hennepin, and it was very specific to this. Any change to that scope whatsoever that changes the scope, you really have to go back to the Metropolitan Council and ask if that's okay. And so there are a lot more rules associated with that funding than that. But to your point of, if you could just morph this project into something different, like all of a sudden implementing pieces of two-way, the Metropolitan Council would consider that a scope change, and you would likely lose that funding. So that's kind of in a nutshell. It's more complicated than that, but that's kind of in a nutshell. Is that fair enough, Josh?
Was landscaping a component of the criteria?
Josh, do you know whether that was part of the criteria?
Yeah, John, greening is basically included as part of the project here. So
yeah, it's worth
and
noting.
That was a good summary, Scott. Thanks.
Yeah, it's worth noting we've had a lot of coordination with the city, green infrastructure folks in the watershed. There's actually a lot of excitement about trying to do something in here, again, to be defined as we are now identifying the spaces that are available for that. Now we can figure out what to do with those spaces. And with that, I think we're past time. We'll certainly hang on if anybody wants to sit and chat, but we'll let you get back to your evenings. If I didn't say it at the beginning, thank you very much. We understand what it means to take 2 hours out of your gorgeous summer evening to spend with us working on infrastructure issues. So we very much appreciate your time. Thank you very much.